My fellow Americans, brothers and sisters all.
We're going the wrong way!
Yes, Starbuck, yes, we are going the wrong way. The presidential election now ending will sadden more than half of us, including a sizable portion of the winning voters. While some exultant rejoicing may be expected by either faction, I expect whomever loses will receive the additional indignity of having their own supporters turn on them quickly, denouncing them as terrible candidates. The headline grabbers, of course, will be the weepy true believers as the media deals in this leading, bleeding, fractious, factious, and hopefully bloodshed will follow. That might further improve the ratings. All the better for them, of course, if there's an ongoing contest. We all hope it might end a little more quietly. However, if Trump loses, many on his side will say that this time he was the Hillary. If Biden loses, Tara Reade will again be raised, and from AOC to Barack Obama, he'll be insulted subtly and loudly for moderation and the color of his skin, perhaps more than the content of his character.
Inevitably, one of them's half mad, and the other wholly unscrupulous.
Beyond our unhealthy fixation with the executive branch, many other elections will result in similar aggravation. Perhaps the only thing we might agree on is that a divided Congress is a blessing if our faction loses the White House. Before we begin, let's start with a premise. This is based on the overwhelming evidence of yours and my social media accounts, as well as the terse family relationships we may have developed with people that don't think exactly like we do over the past few years. We as a people are passionate, usually a good thing, but we become very mean in our passions with all those who disagree with us. We're informed, thanks to cell phones, but rarely, if ever, well informed. We're historically illiterate. This is beyond doubt. That historical illiteracy has ensured that gratitude and a sense of proportion are not among our chief virtues. We're very much like ancient Israel, of whom it was said, "In those days there was no king, for every man did that which was right in his own eyes." We'll address these failings from time to time, but for now, let's at least acknowledge that no one of us is infallible, nor are we the repository of all wisdom and knowledge through the ages. As such, a large zone should be carved out to hear more than the applause of the self. As a starting disclaimer, I should acknowledge that I consider myself a conservative, which means I have no party, though many in the Republican Party do tout that phrase from time to loud acclaim. Still will say that the president and others who claim that mantle and I disagree rather severely on what conservatism means. They might also disagree with that fellow George Will. Still, I'll try to maintain some objectivity about my faction, and we'll take this ride together. All right, now let's move on to our troubles in the clash of these recent titans. Concerning the debt, President Trump does advocate for tax and other reform, but he is assuredly not a fiscal conservative. He has outspent President Obama before even the coronavirus began. The argument may be that making America great again does justify stealing the money to do so from your children and grandchildren. I'm not sure that makes the argument for me. Those who end up paying more taxes than they take, only around 50% of us, is already owing the country about $160,000 a head. That means when your child who was just born comes into the world, they'll owe the federal government $160,000. Happy birthday! So this is the very definition of a moral hazard, and both parties have an awful lot of skin in this ridiculous game. You'll notice that neither of them have made the national debt a talking point whatsoever in this election cycle. Of course, Democrats may be rejoicing the victory of Joe Biden, and if so, you may want to just hold your applause for a minute while you think about what might happen to the national debt. He has promised far more than his predecessor. And in point of fact, he and President Obama had outspent everybody prior to their time. Unfortunately, until now. I don't think that in a coronavirus economy, and for the years to come, we can count on either party doing anything about the national debt. This reminds me a little bit of Grandpa Joe and Willy Wonka. Forgive the Joe jibe here, but here it is. He and the other bedridden grandparents loved their grandson Charlie so much, and his mother, that they stayed in bed all day, waiting to be fed and taken care of.
As soon as I get my strength back, I'm going to get out of this bed and help him.
Dad, in all the years you've been saying you're going to get out of that bed, I've yet to see you set foot on the floor.
Well, maybe if the floor wasn't so cold.
Hi, everybody.
Now, they were saddling them with the burden of their generation's decrepitude, and it was all revealed as sham when finally Grandpa Joe got up with the promise of free chocolate. Now, no doubt, Willie and those Oompa Loompas in his socialist enterprise had the promise of free healthcare and 100% employment driving them on. At least they made a profit. Whoever won, however, we are still going to continue to be the first generation of Americans to inherit from their parents and then steal from their children and grandchildren for eons to come. This is not okay. Greatest generation indeed. All right, now let's talk about race, because frankly, I'm not in enough danger as I am. Yes, half the country never seems to stop talking about how everyone is racist, including people of color who happen to take jobs in law enforcement. Now, the president has been clear in throwing plenty of indefensible, individually racist jabs at people over time. I cannot defend him as a non-racist, because we've all seen some evidence to the contrary. However, setting aside immigration, which is a big deal, I think we would be hard-pressed to find any racist policies promulgated by this administration. In fact, domestic policy, it's hard to make a case that he hasn't done far more than President Obama did. Notice I didn't say President Lincoln. I'm not going to get into that debate. Both these guys are way better than he ever was, not to mention another half dozen since. However, if President Trump's racism is constrained by hoping that black people get the finest education, run companies, and pay good money to golf and stay at Mar-a-Lago, I'm not sure that that isn't a rather benign concern. He has repeatedly condemned white nationalists, though the media never seems to listen to those condemnations. Having said that, he's had a lot of poor rhetoric, to be sure. He talks all the time. He tweets all the time. He says dumb stuff all the time. This sort of chaotic leadership style has assuredly left mixed signals. Now, while organized racists are still a minority, a drastically small minority in this country, he assuredly has left them signals which may have given them encouragement from time to time, though I still think CNN is simply making up all the dog whistles. I will tell you without hesitation that the party of Trump does not welcome these people. There is certainly a growing belief that if they were picking a party right now, they might pick that party because of Trump. Okay, well, guys, you're not welcome. You might as well go back from whence you came, the party of Jim Crow. We'll talk more about them in a minute. Now, let's talk about Joe and the party. I don't believe for a minute that Joe Biden is a racist person. However, I have to say that he and President Obama, in their 8 years, did sacrifice reason for madness in the American dialogue on race. It turns out that calling everyone and everything racist while doing nothing for criminal or immigration reform did, I believe, leave the country a bit more racist than they found it. Not systemically, but personally. If Trump has failed to better salve our wounds, we ought not to be in denial about this, but we also can't deny ourselves the Democratic scab pullers who have this vested interest in the ongoing infection. So if Joe doesn't find a way to tear down the altar of this false god of woke identity politics, these wounds are going to become more gangrenous than they already are. I do worry that we may look back on these years, especially if Biden just won, as the time when everything got worse in this regard. Next, let's talk about immigration. Now, this topic deserves a whole lot more time and attention than we can give it today, but we will talk about it extensively in the future. Now, few things expose the ugliness of our atherosclerotic politics, as does the immigration debate. For today, I summarize it thus. Trump and many in his base, I am sad to say, wanted a wall and border security more than they wanted humane immigration reform. Democratic leaders wanted to thwart Trump's wall promise more than they wanted humane immigration reform. I believe the bloodletting in this debate is on both sides, and I think it was done entirely for political purposes, as it had been in the previous administration. I wish I could champion Republicans over this, but I cannot, not at least for 2 presidential cycles. I should note, however, that there is a reason why many immigrants who come in with fellow travelers largely legally in various countries seem to like Trump. I can't necessarily explain this, but it does seem that these legal immigration populations largely endorse Trump. However, those who know and care about people that are coming in, especially from the southern border, where many people do come in illegally, but are doing so with the best of intentions and the best desire to work and serve here in America with their family, those are the ones that can't stand the guy. I really, really can't blame any one of them. And on this topic, he is very much my least favorite person. I think he could have done far better, and I think with slight compromise, any of any deal, things could have gotten better. But having said that, I have to give in that negotiation the Democrats the down card. I don't see how there was any indication of a reasonable intention to throw some funding towards the wall and also achieve meaningful immigration reform. And I do believe this president would have done it if that middle ground could have been found. And curiously enough, I do believe most Democrats and Republicans, as human beings, do want humane immigration reform. We want to make the system far faster, slicker, wiser, better, and welcome people into this country. And apart from labor rights, and I really mean the labor unions, I don't really see a lot of resistance to this. Of course, slavery to various unions has always been a problem for this dialogue. Billy Joel was right. Honesty is such a lonely word. We had to address it, didn't we? Let's just say the president's policies may not be terribly disconcerting to most Republicans, with the exception of that immigration stuff. But in one sense, he really is among the worst presidents. Not anything like these guys. Let's say he's maybe dishonest Don juxtaposed with old honest Abe over there. Now, even if you accept, as I do, the notion of legal puffery, or the use of a statement expressing subjective rather than objective viewpoints, which no reasonable person would consider anything but nonsense. You know, in Minnesota, we've got a phrase for this. It's a big fish story, right? You always know the guy is lying about the size of the fish. It's legal puffery. Not a big deal. Anybody who's ever lived or spent any serious time in New York knows all kinds of folks like Donald Trump. Don't say you don't. Come on. We all know that there's a lot of folks in New York that talk like Donald Trump. It's the big talk culture out there. Still, even with that accounted for, we can't pass off very much of what he says as something less than casual and unregulated dishonesty, probably built over a lifetime. I, for one, do believe that this casual dishonesty and constant insults have cheapened our political dialogue and culture. And it was pretty cheap to begin with. Hard to make that one go farther south, but there it is. Like Clinton's shameful behavior in office of what could have otherwise been a pretty good presidency, or a pretty solid one, if you're okay with Democrats being president, for those of you on the right, that personal conduct besmirched everything he ever did. Likewise, I think when we look back historically at Trump through that lens of distance, we will have to say that his character in regards to honesty was very much besmirched by his inability to not stay constant. Many of you may know this story, but on the marble mantle in the state dining room at the White House, FDR had inscribed words that John Adams had written to his wife Abigail back in 1800. It said this: "I pray to heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof." I have to ask myself, when President Trump finds himself alone and walking through that area, does he ever read and think about that and ask himself whether he could do a little bit better? We may never know. All right, now if you're a Democrat, and especially if Joe Biden just won to great cheers and accolades, you might be grateful that there's no way in the world this guy could do worse than Trump. That's probably true. But amidst that surge of pride and hope, I'll have it too. I really hope he'll do better. Certainly he will have far fewer tweets and bombastic rhetoric. That's a given. But I don't think that we're going to see a heavenly glow emanating from the White House that will illuminate the city on a swamp. Now, I will say, unlike a whole lot of Democrats, I do easily give Joe a pass for every good stolen line he's stolen from a better speech. Still, I can't forget that he has repeatedly lied about the greatest personal tragedy in his life. This one wasn't used in this cycle, and that's okay. He stopped lying about it in 2007. But you remember that tragically, a truck driver named Curtis Dunn had hit and killed his wife and daughter. Of course, his sons lived. But he had said many times that that truck driver was drunk. He said it in different ways, and he said it in political context, which certainly would have garnered him even more sympathy or aggravation on the behalf of the audience. Now, here's the thing, though. That is utterly false. It was never believed to be true. He himself could have seen no evidence whatsoever that indicated such a thing. In point of fact, his wife very tragically turned into traffic in which that truck had the right of way. There was no indication that he had been drinking that day or any time recently. And still, that man had to carry the burden of knowing that his truck was involved, even though he turned out of the way as quick as he could, even though he spilled his truck in doing so. Still, those people lost their lives in that tragic accident. Now, why would he do this? I don't know. I'd love to hear an explanation, but as near as I can tell, he did it to garner additional sympathy. When you're running on empathy, that's pretty low, even for a politician. I hope he does a whole lot better. And I will say this, I think Joe he'll walk into that same White House and look at that same mantelpiece, and I think he actually will pledge to do better. Here's to hoping. Now, it's possible some casual dishonesty will follow, but let's hope not. Maybe we'll get back to just the good old days when the trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant, it's just that they know so much that isn't so. That was Reagan, by the way. Got to give attribution. Thanks. All right, next let's talk about the courts for a minute. It has been said that even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. If so, I'm only glad that this president found all of his Supreme Court picks on the rolls of the Federalist Society. Now, some dismiss his picks on these grounds, most famously George Will, but given the record of the prior administrations and the lasting nature of these appointments, I have to say a lot of us on the right are perfectly okay with those picks. We're okay with originalists. We're okay with textualists. We were really okay with Scalia. Sorry, folks, it's just how these things break. If nothing else, you have to understand that no matter what happens this election cycle, people will be glad that Trump was in there because that was the outcome, even if they don't think he was the brightest of squirrels. Now let's talk about recent events. Nature or God, or if you, like Jefferson, want to split the difference, nature's God did call Ruth Bader Ginsburg home. That was not Donald Trump's doing. We all know that she wanted to stay a little longer, hoping that her successor would probably be a whole lot more like her. It's understandable. However, when that happened, it was constitutionally inevitable that the president could nominate, and would, and the Republican majority in the Senate could advise, consent, and select that nominee according to constitutional provision. Amy Coney Barrett is in every measure more than qualified, and in spite of ridiculous statement made by members of the Republican Senate during the Merrick Garland nomination, there was nothing untoward in this timing or this process. Now, if that makes you sad, tough. That's how it goes. What should actually make you sad, though, is that one party, and quite frankly, it doesn't matter which one, in this case it was the Democrats, they showed their hand by absurdly suggesting that their unconstitutional legislative priorities were more important than the Constitution itself. That, my friends, is a recipe for disaster. Now, all of us know that Joe has not answered the question about whether he will or will not pack the court. Well, I guess he did. He gave the glib answer that he'll appoint a commission to talk about it. This is a reason why no conservative would likely find themselves voting for him after he said that. This is a very deeply held belief that we need to look at our founding documents in an appropriate way, and for him to suggest the idea, constitutional though it may be, to pack the court. Basically, almost anybody that was on the fence and wished they could vote for Joe on character reasons alone would have flipped back to Trump in an instant simply at that suggestion. If someone becomes an enemy of the founding documents or the cornerstone of our republic, you can scarcely imagine where that damage is going to lead. Perhaps revolution isn't too harsh of a word for that. Instead, we could solve our problems with our healthcare system, immigration reform, equality issues, with a broader base, with a whole lot of Republicans and Democrats, if we would simply commit to making good legislation, something that will avoid offending the Constitution all the way. I believe it can be done. Wouldn't it be nice if we just tried and did that more often? Yeah, see what you think. Next, let's move on to foreign affairs. Mr. Trump has been pathetically uncalibrated in foreign affairs, but he deserves to be acknowledged for helping to expand regional peace with Israel, for defeating ISIS, at least for now, for killing Al-Baghdadi, who's your daddy. We're all glad that happened, aren't we? May differ on Soleimani, but at least the first one was a good idea. Now, he's done that without overly engaging large numbers of troops in long-term deployments, right? He's brought most of those troops home, though we still have some in Syria. We certainly have some in Afghanistan. But he has also done something which I don't know that any other Republican candidate would have done. He's ended decades of placating communist China in trade inequity. Confused as that effort has been, boy, didn't that need to happen? Don't we wish maybe the Uyghurs and others had been involved in those discussions? Well, okay, so whether or not he went far enough is a matter of debate, but I think something there did need to give, and at least something's happening. Let's also talk about what else he's done. In true American fashion, he has managed to betray the Kurds, yet again. Sorry, Kurds, not all of us feel that way. He has given Kim Jong-un international recognition and hugs. Well, that man managed to expand his capability and hit much of the continental U.S. with nukes. Whoops. He's also finally ending our long engagement in Afghanistan in a manner sure to evoke images of our exit from Vietnam. I can't completely lay that at his feet, of course. We have been unfocused there for a good long while, and it was a very highly complicated thing to be doing. So let's hope for better times and better days ahead, no matter who's president next. All right, well, some of you may have gotten your wish. Could be that Joe Biden's in. Well, how is he going to do on foreign affairs? Obama was pretty good, wasn't he, other than the apology tour and all that other stuff? Well, let's put it this way. Robert Gates served under several presidents, but he was President Obama's Secretary of Defense. He's no fan of President Trump, by the way. He said that Joe Biden has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. Ow. Well, he was entirely wrong about nearly everything in the early days of the coronavirus threat, calling Trump famously a xenophobe for closing travel with China. He's now saying about the virus that he will not shut down the country, he'll shut down the virus, which that would make sense if COVID was a WWF wrestler and he was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Since he's not and it isn't, I'm not sure what in the world that's supposed to mean. But I don't know that he's going to do any better than President Trump has done on foreign policy. He may do it with better style, hopefully with less laughter at the big parties, but he'll also probably do it with more stolen money. So, what can you say? Coronavirus, foreign policy, not sure how much better this is going to get. Better batten down the hatches and buckle up for a long ride. All right, my dear listener, you stayed with me this long. What are we going to do now? Well, first, if your guy just won, absolutely enjoy a victory lap. Next, we can look to the future. Well, let's at least try and own the evil of our factions going into the future. Perhaps I could suggest that if you're striving for a refinement of our American Revolution in the near future, join me, and you can start by defining specific problems that we ought to fix, not vague suppositions that can do neither define nor fix. Yes, I'm talking to you, BLM. You may find that by supporting groups like Represent Us and Cato, both of which I support and hope you do too, we may find actually many better ways than protesting and rioting to solve many of our deeply disconcerting problems. At some point, maybe we'll take a look at ourselves stealing from Charlie Bucket and try and cut our spending on ourselves in this, the least of the greatest generations. So folks, given the tumult of our day, I thought it might be wise to mark this moment with something more than the hubris of the present. I'm reminded of something David McCullough said. If you think we have cause to think the nation is going to hell, just remember it's always been going to hell in the minds of some. Certainly that's the case now. He also said we're an optimistic people by nature, and we've always had the reason to be optimistic. Now I hope somehow on this channel in the future, I'll give some measure of added life to that optimism. Here and now, however, I think it's important to reconcile with what we've become. Here and now, we might want to own the corruption of our politics, as well as the corruption in ourselves. This may be our first segment, but hopefully we'll do better in the future. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening.